the end of this day, we ask the Holy Spirit to guide our thoughts and to inspire us with desires to serve Him in the path of the saints who have marched before us unto glory. We find in the life of Elijah an interesting combination of the vertical and the horizontal. First of all, we have the influence that he has over his disciple, Elisha. He is able, rather like the Lord, to pass by and to call. And so Elisha leaves everything and they cling to each other. In the beginning of the second book of Kings, we see to what extent this clinging is expressed. In chapter 2, we have a series of tirades. "You stay here," said Elijah, "for the Lord is only sending me to Bethel. As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." And they went down to Bethel. Then the brotherhood of prophets living at Bethel came out to meet Elisha. "Do you not know that the Lord will carry your Lord and Master away today?" "Yes, I know. Be quiet." And then, "Elisha, you stay here. The Lord is only sending me to Jericho. As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." And they went on to Jericho. Then again, these prophets come living at Jericho, and they say the same thing. "Yes, I know." And then the tirade again. "You stay here. The Lord is only sending me to the Jordan. As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." And they went on together. And this together is powerful in the Hebrew. Togetherness is a concept which is also a part of our life. And it's something that the priest needs. In our day, the priest is more in danger than ever before, because this togetherness is not there. In many parts of the world, geographically and spiritually and morally, the priest is an island. He is isolated, isola, an island, and he has no one with whom he can share. In the life of St. Norbert, founder of the Premonstratensian canons, we have this expression, that he would rest his soul upon Evermode. St. Evermode, his favourite disciple. And this resting of the soul has something that has been there in the Premonstratensian life, where they are protected in their priesthood by fraternal charity based on the rule that they are following, that of St. Augustine. And the rule of St. Augustine is much shorter than that of St. Benedict and much less preoccupied with detail. It is, however, very preoccupied with dynamics. And therefore, because of the grandeur of the lines and the simplicity of the architecture, one sees what matters. We know from testimony that Augustine himself could not live without friends. Indeed, his language talks in those terms. and also in the quality of life that he wanted for his brethren. He wanted the charity to be concrete. I believe it was written on the wall of the refectory where they ate that there was no room in this place for those who ate the character of others, and he would not tolerate any banal, frivolous, hurtful talk. A certain elevation of charity and fraternity was the modus vivendi which he was proposing. And the quality attracted, and that is the best attraction that any community can have, that there is warmth emanating from it. And so much so that he was, from that clerical monastery, so attractive that it would become a nursery of saints, a nursery of priests, and a nursery of bishops in North Africa. Because as in present-day Italy, in Africa of the time, each town had its bishop. As it happens, the thrust of the thesis I did in Rome there for the doctorate went in this direction, that the way ahead for the priesthood was this dynamic, that it had to be looked into again. And the whole problem of priests isolated is something which gives the demon a field day. What will happen? Well, tendentially, humanly, they will seek that support in other areas, and we know what that can mean. It might not be necessarily in a living person, but it might be in the virtual. And all this is something which can immediately distract from what might be lacking inside. It can also lead to either physical or psychological dependencies and addictions of some kind. How many priests smoke, drink, and so on? Replacement. Now, there is no shortcut. The Lord himself essentially is the one and true companion of the soul. And if that is there, much then damage is limited. Hence it is that what I mentioned with regard to the secret of Bishop Fulton Sheen is something to be borne in mind. This condition that he had, this resolution that he made, whatever came in the day, he would always have the holy hour. That is something which, if maintained in some shape or form, will maintain a certain limiting of the damage of our state, because we will be with him, and therefore we're not alone. But it has to be quality encounter. The annals of sanctity are full of good examples of people who reached a high level of this sharing on also the vertical combined with the horizontal. That is to say that because they were encountering each other in the vertical, there was an intense bonding on the horizontal as well. And it's only possible really when that is there, anchored in the other. Otherwise it's pure camaraderie. And by the way, one can test somehow the quality of a priestly assembly in the quality of their sharing. I've been quite impressed, actually, unexpectedly, in the fact that since being incarnated in the Diocese of Meath some years ago, I've been automatically part of the occasional meetings that we go to together, usually on a deanery level. In fact, our dean became bishop recently of another diocese next to us. It was a very good quality deanery, that is to say. And the quality I found was very interesting. But when these priests of the deanery were together, the conversation was very serious. They weren't at all in camaraderie. That was happening accidentally. But they were genuinely there to discuss how to conquer souls. I was impressed. Youngish, fervent, faithful, and hearing each other's confessions, which is interesting. That's true sharing. And this, then, is something which, as early as St. Augustine, is there. It's earlier on, already in the Desert Fathers, and Desert Mothers, actually. We have some examples of the ladies also with this charisma of engendering souls. In the Desert Fathers, it's quite demanding because they actually surrender their soul. They open up completely. There's a term for it, paresia. It's saying everything. They unbutton themselves, and the priest, soul guide, can see inside the starlets, the elder. And that, of course, is still there in Mount Athos. There's something which is still there actually in St. Benedict. In Mount Athos, it's very much cultivated. But it's something which, as early as that, was seen as a safeguard, that the demon couldn't do anything once they opened up and said things as they were, because of the humility involved. And that's the great thing the devil can't bear, humility. But we find it all through the Christian centuries. The other night we had a reading from St. Aelred of Rivaux, the great abbot of that big Cistercian monastery in Yorkshire. He was called the Good Abbot. His monastery was always full because he took everyone, and therefore it was like a hospital. But he loved them into being and into well-being, and he has written gems of spirituality on this issue, Speculum Caritatis, and the whole thing of spiritual friendship, Amicitia Spiritualis. It's there, and he has given to the English spirituality an input which will be there until the end of time. Something that as priests we need to master in our context, that we need quality relationship, and we need friends. And therefore we need to how to handle friends, because friends are delicate. And the more there is love, the more there is hurt. They are exposing themselves to the risk of being hurt. But this element of the way we treat the soul of the proximus, the person next to us, is not indifferent, because we can't come from being bathed in sacramental love. We're handling essential love at the altar, and any sacrament, it's the same love, and then change mode. We are men for others by orientation. The priest is never on holidays, never switched off, he's given. And therefore any person is my proximus while that person is standing before me. And I give that person the respect, the awe almost of the mystery before me that is his due. And that person will pick it up straight away. The way that we answer the phone is not indifferent. The way that we answer a text is not indifferent. The way we answer a letter is not indifferent. We have a remarkable bishop. He answers by return of post, and he always answers personally, and always an extra word, a personal word, whatever it might be, but he cares for each one, his priests in particular. But it's an example of pastoral goodness, and these are the things that work, because he's always got vocations. There are spectacular examples here and there in the annals of sanctity. Our notice saint in Italy was St. Catherine of Siena. There were two actually, St. Catherine of Siena and St. Bernardino of Siena, great preacher. And they were fairly close to each other in time. And St. Catherine was young, but she shared her interior life with the one who had become also a blessed and a head of the order, master of the Grand Master of the Dominican Order, Raymond of Capua, who wrote her life. But though he was older, he would call her Mamma. And the quaintness of their sharing is most interesting. One day, she was too ill to go to church to receive the Blessed Sacrament, and yet the Lord put on her heart a great desire to receive him. He had no intention or inclination that day to celebrate, because in those days it was less frequent celebration. But out of the blue, this desire was put on him to celebrate the sacred mysteries, and so he vested and went to one of the church altars in the big Dominican church. And when he was at the consecration, all was well, but when it came to the fraction, something went wrong. When he broke the sacred host in two, and then in the third part to be put in the chalice, it of its own accord broke into a fourth particle, and this fourth one was nowhere to be found. So he was somewhat upset, because he was very much aware of what that meant. So he was in the celebration trying as best he could with his hands still joined to find where this had gone, all over the place around the altar. He could not find it, so he concluded as best he could with a pain on his heart. He didn't want sacrilege. Immediately after the celebration, he was very upset and was heading for his superior. But on his way there, he bumped into the Carthusian superior, because there was a Charterhouse at Siena, who was looking for Catherine, and was delighted when he bumped into Raymond, because he knew that he was close to her in his ministry. So they went together before he had time to go and see his superior. And so the prior of the Carthusians concluded his business very quickly with Catherine, and then when he got to her, he could see that she had a twinkle in her eye. So he started to have suspicions, and very quickly he got to the point, and she got to the point even more quickly and said, "You will look in vain for that particle, Father. Have you got anything to do with this?" So, not me, Father. Who? The Lord. What? Well, apparently what had happened was that particle had jumped from his hand into her mouth. Way in some hidden altar apparently of the huge church somewhere, I don't know, anyway, it was definitely the host that had gone into her. And you see, the point is this: they were so calm and relaxed in each other's company that they could almost pull each other's leg in the Lord. And that's very interesting. There was a certain, in Italian, rilassatezza, a relaxedness in their sharing, that they were healed naturally by the joy also of their humanity, because it was sanctified. And that comes through also in vestige of the correspondence that we have, because even though she couldn't write, letters were written for her. And the communication is very interesting with regard to the natural bonding that was there in the Lord between her and the future blessed Raymond of Capua. Another example would be precisely that other noble saint, Saint Bernardino, one of the greatest preachers of all time. He went up and down Italy, and outside Italy actually as well, preaching. And he was somebody who, in the ministry of the Word, had a huge influence by the fact that he was both anchored in deep prayer, penance, and mystical life, but also humanly very attractive, because he knew how to communicate in a way which would correspond in medieval times to what Fulton Sheen was doing in the 50s and 60s on television. We know that because contemporary evidence indicates how even 2 hours before he arrived, the piazza, a huge place there in Siena, or wherever he might be, would be full of people, hundreds and hundreds, on that side men and on that side women. We also know it because it happens that somebody at Siena was good at doing stenography, shorthand, and wrote down very quickly what he was saying. And therefore those sermons, you can actually hear them. And we read some of them, parts of them in the refectory, and they are very lively. And he has expressions which are quite powerful. You can see how, even on the human level, he would actually be good company, good, interesting talk, on the level of somebody who doesn't bore. Because if we bore people, no matter how true what we're saying is, we've lost them. It's important to have that communication with them. And that is the key to homiletics, in a sense, more than actually just the content, the actual communication, because there's no point in having perfect contact if it's not getting to them. So there is a certain element of eye contact, physical contact, human contact, which has to be there. It's more in some countries than others. In Italy, you just have to be as they are if you want their attention. They say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Well, it's no use preaching as you might do in England. In Italy, you've got to bring your whole body into bearing, because that's how they talk. And the voice and everything has to be used. In other words, a certain dramatic mode has to come in if you want to get through to them in a way that would actually have any effect at all. So it has to know one's people and to know how they tick. But above all, throughout all cultures, there has to be the fact that one is actually speaking to and not at. There's actually communication going on, and it's not being blocked by a sheet of paper. It's suicide, homiletically, to be blocked by a text, because you're not then communicating, you are actually reciting. And it's two different modes, quite different. It's far better to have a short, memorable, oomph-filled moment that will have its impact for the day and the week than to have a carefully chiseled, immaculately perfect, written, memorized text. What they want is an experience. And these saints, masters of the word, gave them an experience. And in those days, of course, it was easier because there was not much else in the way of experience. Now we're up against it because everyone will compare us with who was on the television, and we're not much good compared. We can be! There's no reason not to be. A bit of inventivity can actually go a long way. And something which actually hits everyone can be brought into every Sunday sermon, including the children. Something for everyone. And the key is to know when they're no longer listening. There's body language to show that. That's why it's important to be looking at them. And my own opinion is this, that it's far better not to have a dependency on a written text. A written text can come in when you want to quote, when you want to back up something. It's not the way to communicate your person. It's far better, in my opinion, if one needs things before one to have points. To know where you're going. To know where one is taking off, where one is in flight mode, and where one is going to land. But to be dependent on something en route is suicide as regards communication. Because it's far better if one can, after a certain time, just be able to look straight at them all the time, and all around them, everyone, to make sure there's not one nodding off. And if there is one, gets them to wake up again by something unexpected. And whatever one says, at least one has got them. So something will have happened in that assembly. But anyway, this to say that this then was the way that these great preachers were working. St. Vincent Ferrier, the same great Dominican preacher. And this particular saint, Bernardino, actually he was a young monk, Franciscan, there in Sejano, where I would be sent on a Sunday morning, so that we had his relics there in the church. And it was something which had its effect on the whole area, because the whole area around us had traces of him, because wherever he preached, he left behind him the monogram. That is, he preached with the monogram of the Holy Name of Jesus, preaching on the Holy Name of Jesus, and all the buildings around would end up with this monogram over the door. So they're still there in that whole area of Tuscany. But anyway, what is not known so much about him is the mystical side to him, and also this, that on the level of this companionship, he was an extraordinary model. It's known that for a good while, travelling for miles and miles, he would have one faithful companion with him, Brother Vincent, to whom he told everything. But he was not to say anything to anyone else. And they travelled, wait for it, on the same animal. Miles and miles, sitting on the same, I think it was a donkey actually. And they therefore were physically sharing time and their souls. They would pray and they would share. And therefore, Brother Vincent was not free to say all that he knew when eventually, partly from fatigue, St. Bernardino petered out at Aquila, where he's buried. But we know from suggestions that have come out that he was also a great mystic. He wasn't allowed to say a thing, but we can have the intuition that things were happening on a mystical level with this great saint. Now, when that is the case, that's when the other two also is able to happen. That people who love intensely the Lord Jesus somehow encounter a soul that is doing the same in Jesus. And there's a bonding there of a mystical nature. And this is perhaps something of the freedom that the great good abbot of Rivaux is talking about when he speaks about the way that, for instance, in a kiss, two breaths are combined. The two souls combine in true spiritual friendship because they become from two one. It goes into that. Now, that's not indifferent because the Lord gave a model. He sent them out in twos. And that's been picked up by the fathers of the church as a lesson that true charity is also horizontal. And we notice too that the Lord, in whole his teaching, was very reluctant to give what we would call rubrics and legalistic details. It would seem that the whole point of the simplicity of his preaching was that we should get the end point, rather as later on St. Augustine, speaking in his name. And at the end, when he was giving, as it were, his last will and testimony, he was not insisting on, for instance, the way the Eucharist should be celebrated. That was left to the Holy Spirit. He was saying, this is my commandment. By this shall they know that you are my disciples. Repeated in different forms, right there in St. John in the final discourse. It's very simple, and yet essential. And it would seem that the whole thrust was this: if that is there, then the Trinitarian life that I have come to bring will be there, and the Lord, your God himself, will be doing the work. If it's not there, you're in my way.